She walked into his wedding, head held high, diamond heels, red lips, and twin bodyguards flanking her. A gasp rippled through the crowd. The ex he tried to humiliate was unrecognizable. He thought he could break her, but what no one at that wedding knew was who she really had become. By the time he realized, she had already won. Have you ever wanted to prove someone wrong so badly that every late night, every setback, every scar became fuel? This isn't just a story of betrayal. It's a story of becoming. Stick with me, because the woman he left, she didn't just come back stronger. She returned dangerous. Everyone has a moment when silence becomes a story, when pain becomes power. Here we don't just tell stories. We reveal the ones they tried to bury. For stories inspire stories of heartbreak, betrayal, a tale of romance. Hit the subscribe button. We tell the stories that stay with you. 7 years ago, no one would have noticed her in a crowd. Stella didn't come from wealth, didn't wear labels, didn't walk into rooms like she owned them. She was the kind of woman people overlooked, not because she lacked beauty or charm, but because she didn't announce herself. She was soft-spoken, kind-hearted, and completely in love. And unfortunately, the man she loved was the kind who needed a woman who sparkled loudly. Marco, on the other hand, was everything she wasn't. Born into a family that had never once worried about bills or broken cars or whether the rent would clear by the 5th. He wasn't just rich. He was polished. The kind of man whose shoes were always shined and whose watch cost more than her childhood home. He was charming, effortlessly so. People leaned in when he spoke. Stella, she leaned in too until he leaned away. When they met, it felt like a fairy tale no one believed would last. She was working part-time at a gallery cafe when he strolled in with his entourage, all of them in navy suits and expensive cologne. But Marco noticed her, or at least he said he did. He asked her name, learned she liked art, and said her laugh was the kind of sound you wanted to bottle and keep. Within weeks, they were dating. Within months, she was invited to dinner parties she had no idea how to dress for. She tried, though. God, she tried. She smiled at his colleagues, nodded along to wine talk she didn't understand, learned to walk in heels that left blisters. But no matter how much effort she put in, there was always this quiet hum in the background, the sound of not quite belonging. It wasn't that they said anything cruel. It was worse. They acted like she wasn't there, like she was a placeholder until someone better came along. And slowly, Marco started to treat her the same. The man who once brought her sketchbooks and left notes in her jacket pockets became someone who canceled dinners last minute and told her to try and look a little more polished before events. She could feel it, the distance, the shift. He still kissed her forehead, but he stopped holding her hand in public. Still called her babe, but with the casual indifferent tone you'd use for a houseplant. That should have been her first real warning. The tone, not the words. Those still came coated in fake affection. But the way they sounded when they hit her ears, hollow, rushed, like someone saying what they're supposed to say, not what they feel. But Stella had been trying to hold on to a fantasy for too long. And fantasy has a cruel way of fogging your view until you don't know the difference between affection and habit. So when Marco dropped to one knee beneath a blooming cherry blossom tree in Kyoto, yes, that kind of proposal, she told herself it was real. Her heart said yes before her brain could even process it. She cried. He smiled. Tourists clapped. Somewhere between his pocket square and the 2-carat ring, she believed he meant it. Despite the growing cracks in their relationship, this meant permanence, love, maybe even redemption. She never imagined she was being used as a transitional piece, something pretty to frame for a while before he found what truly matched his curated image. The engagement photos came next. She was in a simple cream dress, and he was in a navy suit that looked like it was tailored by angels. They posed for the cameras like royalty. She stood slightly behind him in every shot. At the time, she thought it was just the photographer's direction. Later, she realized it was a metaphor. 2 months later, she was at work halfway through a latte she couldn't afford when her phone exploded with notifications, texts from friends, mentions on Instagram. Her name was trending somehow. Her fingers shook as she opened the article. Golden CEO Marco Monroe confirmed split from fiancée Stella K. There was no call, no conversation, just a public statement crafted by his PR team. 4 sentences, maximum damage. We remain close friends. We wish each other the best. Our paths have grown in different directions. She reread the article 3 times, waiting for her brain to catch up to the betrayal. There were no messages from Marco, no explanation, just silence and a neatly packaged press release that erased her from his life. They had been in love, or at least she had been, and now she was nothing more than a bullet point in a media blurb. Her phone buzzed again. A picture. This time he was at a rooftop party, drink in hand, arm around a woman Stella recognized. A model, of course, the same one who had been just a friend when Stella asked about her 2 weeks ago. The comments were brutal, some sympathetic. Most weren't. Upgrade, one person wrote. Should have seen it coming, another said. She never belonged in his world. That one stung the most because deep down Stella had feared it all along. That she didn't belong. That no matter how hard she tried to keep up, to adapt, to blend in, she would always be just a visitor in his elite little universe. She had bent herself into 1,000 shapes trying to be enough. And now she was discarded like the wrong puzzle piece. So she did the only thing she could. She unplugged, deleted the apps, canceled everything, moved out of their apartment, his apartment, really, and into a shoebox studio that smelled like dust and desperation. She cut her hair, dyed it dark, stared at herself in the mirror, trying to find the version of her that existed before him. But she couldn't. That version was gone. In her place stood someone unfamiliar, someone raw and angry and deeply, deeply awake. She had loved blindly. And now her eyes were open. Marco had given her a crash course in cruelty wrapped in charm. And in losing everything, she was about to learn what it meant to build from nothing. She was about to become someone no one, especially Marco, would see coming. Would you believe that the next time she saw him, she'd be standing across from him in heels he once said she could never walk in, wearing a dress worth more than the car she used to drive, and carrying a secret that would bring the entire room to a hush? Yeah, but we're not there yet. Stay with me, because the revenge you're expecting isn't even the half of it. Let's talk about her. The girl after Stella. Because of course there was one, isn't there always? Barely 6 weeks after the press release detonated Stella's life, Marco was photographed again, this time on a beach in the Maldives. Clear skies, turquoise water, 2 wine glasses, and a woman with legs like runway lights and cheekbones sharp enough to cut through Stella's dignity. The model. The same one Stella had been warned about. The same one who used to show up at Marco's events coincidentally, laugh a little too loud at his jokes, and pretend not to notice Stella standing beside him. Now she was on his arm. In those photos, Marco looked free. Not sad, not apologetic, just lighter. Like someone who'd finally made the right decision. And for the tabloids, the story practically wrote itself. Billionaire bachelor leaves behind modest fiancé for glamorous model girlfriend. Power couple alert. Likes flooded in. Comments gushed. Stella watched it all in silence. She wasn't looking to hate watch, at least not at first. But sometimes pain makes you keep tabs on the very thing that broke you, like scratching a bruise to make sure it still hurts. And oh, it did. The worst part, the new girl was stunning. The kind of stunning that made people stop mid-scroll and go, "Damn!" She moved like she knew she was always being watched. And Stella had never learned to perform that way. She had always led with heart, not spectacle, with vulnerability, not angles. But Marco didn't want a heart. He wanted a show. The engagement came quickly. Publicly, of course. A rooftop proposal at sunset, drone footage, soft jazz playing in the background. Stella saw the video once. That was enough. He gave that woman the engagement Stella had dreamed about, the kind he claimed he wasn't the type to do. Funny how the right image changes everything. Now pause for a second. Imagine being Stella in this moment. Would you lash out? Would you post some cryptic quote about growth and betrayal? Maybe subtweet your pain until people started asking if you were okay. Stella did none of that. She disappeared. No more posts, no tagged photos. She even changed her number. It was like she dropped off the planet, and for most people, including Marco, she had. The world thought she was just another broken heart left behind in a billionaire's glitter trail. They assumed she'd crawl back to her old life, cry into wine glasses with her friends, maybe blog about heartbreak and healing. But Stella had something different in mind. She didn't disappear because she was destroyed. She disappeared because she was rebuilding. And you can't lay new foundations with everyone watching your rubble. She knew that if she stayed, she'd be defined by that relationship forever. The girl Marco dumped. The fiancé he left. And Stella, she was never going to be someone's cautionary tale. She packed what little she had, some clothes, a sketch pad, a few old books, and moved halfway across the world. She didn't tell anyone where, just left a single note for the one friend she trusted. The only line scribbled in ink. "I need to become someone else now. I'll find you when I'm ready." Let me ask you something. Have you ever lost so much that you no longer cared about what people thought of you? Because that's where real power begins. Not in applause, but in silence. Stella had no followers watching her journey. No sponsors, no pity comments from strangers. Just a hunger, a quiet rage, a steady fire that burned under her skin. She took jobs beneath her skill level, cleaned floors, waited tables, read business books on her break, watched online courses like her life depended on it. Because in a way, it did. She was building something no one could take from her. Not fame, not beauty, something real. In a tiny apartment with cracked tiles and no heating, she launched her first idea. A tiny startup, clumsy, imperfect, but hers. She stayed up till 3 a.m. most nights, trying to code, reading until her eyes blurred, writing business plans on napkins because she couldn't afford a printer. No one cheered her on, no one clapped, but she kept going. Because when the world writes your obituary too early, you have two choices: live down to it or come back from the dead. And Stella, she was preparing for resurrection. Now, if you're still with me, if you've ever been underestimated, overlooked, or cast aside, you'll want to hear what happens next, because the girl they forgot, she's about to become the woman they'll never be able to ignore. It was 5 years to the month since the press release. Stella had just wrapped up a pitch meeting when it arrived. Simple, elegant, arrogant. A white envelope with gold trim and her full name embossed like royalty. There was no sender written on the outside, but the weight of it in her hands told her exactly who it was, from before she even broke the seal. She opened it slowly, like she already knew it was a trap wrapped in formal stationery. And there it was, a wedding invitation. Marco Monroe and Selena Devonshire cordially invite you to celebrate the beginning of their forever. Stella stared at the words, like they were a joke, like if she blinked long enough, the ink would smudge and reveal the punchline, but instead, beneath the faux poetic fluff and destination details, was a single handwritten note in pen that made her stomach twist. Please attend. It would mean the world to me. M. The audacity. The sheer, blinding, marble-carved audacity. After everything, after ghosting her with a press release, after proposing to another woman in public, after erasing her like she never mattered, he wanted her to witness him marry someone else. Why? For closure? For sport? Or maybe, just maybe, because he assumed she was still that quiet, easily dismissed girl who once stood in his shadow, grateful just to be included in the room. But here's the thing. That girl was gone. Long gone. In her place stood a woman who owned her name now, who had built something from the ashes of that heartbreak. Her startup thriving, her identity solid, her confidence no longer borrowed from the man next to her, but stitched from every hard night and lonely triumph she had fought through in silence. Stella didn't cry. She didn't curse. She didn't even feel bitter. What she felt, strangely enough, was clarity and something sharper beneath it. Opportunity. She read the invite again, slower this time. Destination wedding, coastal estate in Italy, private vineyard, dress code, formal. She smirked. Of course, it was a vineyard. Marco always did like to repeat his greatest hits. For a brief moment, Stella considered declining, but then she thought of something else, something deeper than revenge or nostalgia. She thought about reclaiming the story, about walking into a room full of people who once dismissed her and letting them see exactly what they missed. She was no longer the +1. She was the headline. And make no mistake, she didn't plan to arrive quietly. And what happened next? You'll want to stay for that because, trust me, everything they thought they knew about her, it was about to come undone. She didn't say yes to the wedding out of revenge. Not at first. There was no secret plan to sabotage the ceremony, no dramatic speeches locked and loaded. Stella wasn't that person anymore. She'd buried the petty version of herself years ago, right next to the broken girl who used to cry herself to sleep over a man who treated her like a seasonal accessory. But when that invitation landed in her hands, heavy with perfume and entitlement, something stirred. Not rage, not bitterness, something quieter, sharper. A whisper in the back of her mind, one that said, "Go show them." Not because you need to prove anything to them, but because you need to prove something to yourself. Because here's the truth. They never tell you. Sometimes closure doesn't come from long talks or final goodbyes. Sometimes closure shows up in heels and silk, and the kind of confidence that doesn't flinch when the past tries to make eye contact. So she said yes not to him, not to them, to her, the woman she'd become. The one who had clawed her way back from humiliation with grace and grit. The one who no longer asked, "Was I enough?" But instead knew she always had been. They just didn't see it. She spent days curating her look, not for vanity, for armor. A custom gown in midnight blue, sleek, striking, unapologetic. A slit high enough to speak without saying a word. Her hair pulled back like a crown, not a curtain. Jewelry, subtle but sharp, nothing borrowed, nothing blue, everything hers. She remembered standing in front of the mirror the night before her flight, not to admire herself, but to meet herself. Because for the first time in years, she didn't see the girl Marco left behind. She saw the woman he could never deserve. Still, she didn't expect the chaos she caused by simply showing up. The next few days were a blur of logistics, custom gown fittings, flights, strategically leaked press mentions that hinted at her recent business success without screaming it. She didn't want to show off. She wanted to show up as the woman she'd fought to become. Her old friend, the one she left the note for all those years ago, called her the night before the flight. "Are you sure about this?" she asked gently. "You owe them nothing." "I know. That's the point. Because showing up isn't always about proving them wrong. Sometimes showing up is about reminding yourself how far you've come. The morning of the wedding dawned warm and golden, like the universe had sent sunlight as a peace offering. The coastal estate buzzed with the energy of $1 million production, because that's exactly what it was. Caterers glided like clockwork. Musicians rehearsed the fifth rewrite of a casual love song. Stylists, planners, PR handlers, everyone moved with forced calm, masking panic behind clipboards and espresso shots. The press had arrived hours earlier, tipping off the illusion of exclusivity. It wasn't just a wedding, it was a media event. Drones circled like lazy vultures. Cameras lined the estate entrance, and photographers polished their lenses like they were about to shoot royalty. And in a way they were. Marco Monroe, tech golden boy turned billionaire investor, was marrying Celine Devonshire, model, philanthropist, and heiress of the Devonshire design empire. It was the kind of union tabloids worshipped. Beauty, wealth, legacy, the headlines wrote themselves. But the story everyone came to tell, that wasn't the one that would unfold. Because just after noon, while guests were still sipping champagne and murmuring in curated designer fabrics, the buzz changed. A single black car pulled up. No entourage, no press alert, just a sleek, silent vehicle that whispered power without screaming it. Doors opened, and out stepped Stella. And for a moment, everything stopped. Even the breeze seemed to hold its breath because she didn't look like a woman showing up to watch her ex get married. She looked like a woman who had already won. Midnight blue gown that kissed the earth and carved her shape like a sculpture. Hair pulled into a low twist that said chic without begging for approval. Skin glowing not with makeup but with freedom. That rare kind of radiance you only get when you don't need anyone's permission to shine. The press turned immediately. Cameras fired like fireworks. Who is that? She wasn't on the list. Wait, is that Stella? Stella. Stella. And Marco, standing at the top of the garden steps beside the altar, caught it all. He turned, looked, froze. For a full 10 seconds he forgot to breathe, because the girl he left behind, the one he dismissed, diminished, and discarded like a seasonal coat, had just walked into his wedding, looking like his consequence. But Stella didn't flinch, didn't even blink. She smiled once politely, and made her way down the marble pathway like it was hers. And in many ways, it was because her presence stole the air from the ceremony. Her silence became the new music. Her story, one no one in that space fully knew, had suddenly become the loudest thing in the room. She took her seat near the front, legs crossed, chin high, not defiant, not arrogant, just whole. Celine saw her too, and to her credit, she didn't react. Not visibly. But her eyes flicked, her posture shifted, and anyone watching closely could tell. She felt it. The bride knew the ex wasn't just a footnote. She was the shadow that never truly left the story. And then, as if the universe had been waiting for the most cinematic beat, the music swelled. The ceremony began. A hush fell. Marco straightened his tie. Selene stepped forward in lace and diamonds, but the cameras, they kept drifting toward Stella. Toward the woman whose name had once been deleted from Marco's life, but whose presence was now rewriting the ending of his perfect day. And if you're watching this right now thinking, what would I have done? Here's a better question. What would they say if you walked in like Stella did? Because Stella wasn't finished. She hadn't said a word. But the day was about to speak for her. And Marco, he watched it all unfold, tried to play it cool, laughed too loud at his best man speech, avoided eye contact with her during dinner. But his fiancée, Celine, she noticed, women always do. Because Celine wasn't dumb. Vain, maybe, but stupid not at all. She leaned in once during the evening and whispered something sharp into Marco's ear. He flinched. She didn't laugh. And Stella, she saw it all from across the room. The very empire Marco thought he'd built without her was cracking, and she didn't have to lift a single finger. Because sometimes the greatest power isn't what you do, it's what your absence did to them, and that's what made it so delicious. Because as they toasted champagne flutes and exchanged curated vows beneath chandeliers and floral arches, Stella didn't have to say a word to rewrite the entire narrative. She was the story now. Not as the jilted ex, not as the girl left behind, but as the one who disappeared, transformed, and came back untouchable. But let's rewind for a moment. Because before the arrival, before the stares and whispers, before Marco's jaw nearly hit his cufflinks, there was the disappearance. Stella had vanished into a world no one expected her to survive in, let alone thrive. When she left, she didn't just move apartments, she changed countries. She moved to Lisbon with nothing but 2 suitcases and a mind full of bruises. No plan, no comfort, no applause, just a vow to herself. Never again will I shrink to fit someone's world. And that became her blueprint. She enrolled in a coding boot camp, not because she wanted to be trendy, but because she was done asking men to build things for her. She wanted to understand how the world worked behind the curtain. She learned fast, studied like her breath depended on it, lived off black coffee and secondhand ambition. By the end of year 1, she launched her first digital product. It failed badly. Most people would have stopped there, but Stella wasn't most people anymore. She buried the shame, picked through the rubble, and started again. Quietly, fiercely. No startup parties, no LinkedIn posts, just work. Relentless, unsexy, no days off kind of work. She learned how to pitch, how to fundraise, how to own rooms filled with men who didn't expect her to know what seed round meant. She faced rejections that made her cry in bathroom stalls and wins that no one clapped for but her reflection. And by year 4, she was the youngest tech founder in Europe to secure a $10 million Series A funding round. Let that sink in. The girl who once cried herself to sleep over a man who made her feel small now stood on Forbes' radar, had a wait list of investors begging to get into her next round, and a team of 80 employees who looked to her for vision. And still she told no one from her past. No flashy posts, no revenge selfies, no calls to just catch up. She didn't need to broadcast her comeback. She was living it. But the beauty of the universe, it always circles back. And the people who once underestimated you, they always hear about it eventually. The whispers had started about a year before the wedding. A mysterious founder shaking up the sustainability tech space. Female, young, fierce, unattached to any VC bros or nepotism. A real outsider with teeth. Marco's board members mentioned her once during a meeting. He didn't connect the dots. Not yet. But Celine did because, unlike him, she watched Stella quietly, studied her. And if you're wondering, yes, there was jealousy, but also something deeper. Respect. Because deep down, every woman knows what it costs to rebuild yourself from ashes no one mourned. And Celine, she might have won the man, but she knew Stella had won something bigger. Stella didn't need validation. She didn't even need recognition. But showing up to that wedding, that was about alignment. A full circle moment. Not for applause, not for revenge, but for her. And if you've ever felt like you were the forgotten one, the underestimated one, the maybe someday, drop a heart in the comments because Stella's story isn't just a fairy tale. It's a blueprint, and we're just getting to the best part. Marco's mother gasped when she saw her. A soft, involuntary sound that escaped before she could remember. She wasn't supposed to feel anything about Stella anymore. It wasn't the kind of gasp reserved for gossip. It was the kind of gasp that said, "I made a mistake. We all did." Celine blinked once, then again. Her eyes narrowed the way people's do when they're trying to register a threat they didn't see coming, because she had prepared herself for a lot of things that day. Puffy eyes, frizzy hair, overcooked duck, even cold feet. But this, she hadn't prepared for Stella. Not this Stella. Not the Stella who moved through the ceremony like she owned the copyright to every scene. Not the Stella whose presence was so silent and self-assured even the violinist missed a note trying not to stare. Not the Stella wrapped in that gown, deep navy, lined with a constellation of stitched silver tailored like power itself. Marco's best man, Julian, leaned over and whispered, "That's the one that got away, huh?" Marco didn't answer because there was no answer. How do you explain to someone that you left a woman like that? How do you tell them you once called her too ordinary, too ambitious, too not enough, and then watched her walk into your wedding looking like she was crafted by divine retaliation? A few rows back, the whispers spread like spilled perfume. Some didn't recognize her. Some did. The ones who had met her years ago couldn't reconcile the memory with the masterpiece now commanding the front row. They tried to pretend they weren't impressed. But the way they stared gave them away. Even the photographers supposed to focus on the bride kept angling toward Stella. And she never flinched. She knew what they were thinking. She could feel it. That magnetic, almost disorienting power of someone who no longer needs to speak to be heard. The kind of presence you only earn after years of being silenced, doubted, and dismissed. Stella didn't just glow. She radiated confidence, clarity, closure. She crossed her legs slowly, placed her hand over the clutch resting in her lap, and glanced up at the altar, not to make a scene, but because the story unfolding was hers, whether they liked it or not. Marco met her eyes. A flicker, just a flicker of something, passed through him. Regret, panic, maybe even longing. He looked away too quickly for anyone to know. But Stella caught it, and she smiled. Not a smirk, not petty, just the kind of smile that says, "I've healed so far past you, you don't even recognize the view from where I stand." It was the kind of smile that cracks a man open from the inside, because it reminds him of every door he closed that never unlocked again. And Selena, she noticed the glance. She noticed everything. She adjusted her veil, stiffened her back, and whispered something to Marco as she took her place beside him. He nodded, distracted. But in that moment, just for a second, his hands trembled because for all his money and charm and press-friendly smiles, there was one thing Marco Monroe couldn't buy back. Stella and the version of himself that left her behind. That man no longer felt like the hero in his own story. If you're watching this, and you've ever wondered whether people regret losing you, let me tell you something. They do. Maybe not immediately, but eventually, when you level up without them, when you glow differently, when you show up without warning, and make the world notice you. So, if you've ever felt invisible before, drop a star in the comments because this next part, this is where Stella's silence becomes a storm. And no one, not the groom, not the bride, not even the guests, was ready for what was about to unfold. If you're shocked already, just wait. The ending isn't just a twist, it's a revelation. Stick around. And if you love justice served cold, subscribe. Marco turned toward her as the officiant droned on, the way someone glances at a sudden chill in the air. His lips curled into that signature smile, charming, controlled, rehearsed. The same smile he used in interviews, in investor meetings, in red carpet photos with Celine. It was the smile of a man used to getting what he wanted, of managing perception, like a spreadsheet. "I'm glad you came," he said quietly. as if the words were meant to float past the ceremony to land just for her. But something in his eyes cracked. It was subtle. You'd miss it if you didn't know what to look for, but Stella saw it instantly. His pupils didn't dilate in surprise. They shrank. That's fear. Mild panic dressed as curiosity. And his jaw tightened, but only slightly. His fingers rubbed the edge of his cufflink the way he always did when his mind spiraled. Marco was unraveling internally while the world smiled at him, like this was the best day of his life. But it wasn't because standing 20 feet away was his greatest regret, wearing confidence like a crown. Stella didn't respond to his words. Not with her mouth, anyway. She tilted her head just slightly and held his gaze. "I see you," her eyes said. "And I see what you lost." And that was the moment. That exact second when the groom realized you only know you've made a mistake when it walks in taller than you remembered. When it radiates peace without needing your presence. When it doesn't come to ask for closure, but offers it anyway, just by standing still. Marco looked away first. And that's how you know, because a man who walks away from gold thinking it's gravel always flinches when he realizes he was wrong. The officiant asked for the rings. Marco blanked. His best man nudged him gently, pulling him back into the moment. But Marco's mind wasn't in the wedding anymore. It had jumped backwards violently to that day he told Stella she didn't fit this world, that her ambition made him feel crowded, that her love, though deep, was too heavy to carry. And now here she was, weightless, untouchable, standing tall in a world she built. He swallowed hard. Celine noticed her smile faltered for a beat. Stella, she never moved. Because when you're the one who was left behind, discarded, underestimated, you don't need revenge. Sometimes your presence is the loudest revenge of all. Because power like that, it doesn't come from shouting. It comes from surviving, from growing, from becoming the thing they swore you could never be. And just when Marco thought the ceremony could go on as planned, the universe had other plans because something or someone was about to interrupt, and the real story had only just begun. The ceremony ended the way a movie does, when you know the director left an alternate ending on the cutting room floor. The kiss, the applause, the forced claps from people who weren't clapping for love, but for closure, or at least for the open bar. Stella remained seated the whole time. Not out of protest, not from pain, but because her standing wasn't required. Her power came from stillness. But dinner was a different game. The reception was hosted in a glass-roofed garden courtyard, bathed in fairy lights and self-importance. Strings of jasmine dangled from trellises like whispers, and the clinking of wine glasses was timed with curated laughter. This was where reputations were managed. This was where the real performance began. And that's when the might came out. First the best man, then Selena's sister, too emotional to finish her speech, though everyone could tell she was reading off a notes app. A few chuckles, a few tears. And then, as if fate had been waiting to flick the final domino, Selene reached for the mic. She stood gracefully, her gown shimmering with the kind of beauty that gets you on magazine covers, but not necessarily into real love. Her voice sweetened with champagne and strategy. Rang clear. "We just want to thank everyone for being here today," she said, eyes sweeping the crowd. "It means so much to celebrate with friends, family, and those who've played important roles in Marco's journey." Then she looked directly at Stella. "We're especially honored to have his ex here," she said with a perfect smile. "It takes courage to show up." There it was, a sugar-coated dagger dipped in etiquette, dressed in politeness, but sharp enough to bleed ego. The room went still. A few heads turned like they weren't eavesdropping. One, of course, they were. Stella tilted her head again and stood. Not rushed, not rattled. She walked up to the microphone with a grace that felt rehearsed, but wasn't. It was earned. Every step was quiet thunder, and by the time she reached the center, even the servers had stopped moving. She held the mic gently, looked around, let the silence marinate, let them wonder what she would say. "I wasn't planning to speak," she began, her voice calm, but soaked in steel. "But since I've been honored," the crowd chuckled nervously. Celine's smile froze in place. "I'll say a few words." Marco shifted in his chair. "Marco and I, we were very different people 5 years ago," Stella said, her eyes steady. "And I think we both thought we knew what love looked like. But the truth is, sometimes love doesn't end. It just evolves into lessons, into boundaries, into the kind of silence that teaches you more than words ever could." Someone in the back audibly whispered, "Damn." Stella smiled. She wasn't done. "When Marco ended things, I thought I'd lost everything. My future, my worth, my voice. But turns out what I lost was just the echo of who I thought I needed to be." She paused. "And what I gained was me." She didn't look at Marco. She didn't need to. She was speaking to every woman in that room who had been dismissed, belittled, or left behind with no explanation, only echoes and empty inboxes. "To the bride," Stella continued, raising her glass, "I hope your love is kind. And to everyone else, sometimes the best revenge isn't payback." She took one step back. "It's becoming untouchable." The room exploded. Cheers, murmurs, stunned silence wrapped in applause. Celine lowered her glass. "Marco." He didn't blink for a full 5 seconds. "Let me ask you, if you had one chance to say your truth in front of everyone who doubted you, what would you say? What line would you drop that would echo in their minds long after you left? Drop it in the comments below. Your one-liner, your mic drop. Because sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply show up. But showing up with dignity, that's when you own the room. And Stella, she didn't just own it. She rewrote the narrative. Stella stood there in heels that cost more than Marco's first car, her voice echoing softly beneath the glass ceiling. But it wasn't just her voice people heard. It was the sound of arrival, of power reclaimed, of years swallowed in silence now flooding back in precision-cut syllables. "Once," she said, glancing around the room like she wasn't just speaking to them, but through them. "Someone here believed I wasn't enough, that I didn't belong, that I had no name." She let the sentence hang just long enough for Marco to flinch. The room was so quiet you could hear the shift in posture, chairs creaking as guests leaned in, breathing slower, waiting. "But names," Stella continued, her voice, velvet-coated steel, "are not inherited. They're built." And today, she paused. Every eye in the room fixed on her. "It's the name behind the tech company that funded this very wedding venue." Gasps, muffled and sharp, ricocheted around the garden like glass breaking on marble. Even Celine's confident posture faltered. She turned toward Marco slowly, like she was watching a ghost drift through her honeymoon. Her lips parted, but no words came out. "Marco." His fingers twitched on his wine glass. He knew the name. Of course he did. Stellara. It had been in every tech magazine for the last 6 months, profiled as the breakout AI platform revolutionizing female-founded startups. The name Stella created by blending her own with Aurora, the light that shows up after darkness. And now it was literally lighting up the most expensive wedding he'd ever hosted. He didn't know. He never knew, because when he left her, she had nothing but a cracked iPhone, a thrift store laptop, and a small amount in her account. He thought she'd crawl, disappear, settle. But she didn't crawl. She built a ladder one rung at a time with every sleepless night, Every client who ghosted her, every investor who called her too emotional, every rejection that carved out more resilience, and now her name was stitched into the contract for this very garden venue right next to the catering company, the lighting rig, and the 3-tier cake flown in from Milan. Stella looked at Marco again, calm, measured, devastating. She said, "It's funny." She scanned the stunned faces. When you're told you don't belong somewhere, you start creating spaces where you do. People didn't know whether to clap, cry, or simply watch. They did all three because what they were witnessing wasn't just a speech. It was a resurrection. The return of someone they thought had vanished. But Stella hadn't vanished. She'd been building quietly, fiercely, out of sight, and above expectations. She leaned in slightly, like she was sharing a secret with every woman who had ever been made to feel small. "And for the record," she added, soft but firm, "sometimes being underestimated is the most powerful thing that can happen to you, because by the time they see you coming," she stepped back from the mic, "you're already in the room they built without you." Silence. Then applause. The eruption. The room broke into thunderclaps, not out of politeness but reverence. Because everyone, every single person knew they just witnessed something rare. Not revenge, not drama. Evolution. And if you're still here watching, maybe you've been underestimated too. Maybe someone once told you your name didn't carry weight, that your dreams were too loud, that your seat at the table didn't exist. But trust me, you can build the table. You can name the room. You can own the skyline. Drop a rose in the comments if you felt every word of Stella's speech. Because this story, it's not fiction. It's a mirror. And the best part, the most unbelievable twist was still to come. Marco's jaw twitched so sharply, you'd think someone had rewound his face back to disbelief in slow motion. For a man so polished, so perfectly media-trained, this was the first time in years his expression cracked like porcelain. And Celine, her fork, silver engraved, flown in from Paris, clattered against her gold-rimmed plate like a truth too heavy to hold. She didn't even blink, just stared at Stella, mouth parted, eyes calculating a future that suddenly didn't look so shiny anymore. And the room? Oh, the room had stopped breathing entirely. Stella didn't gloat. She didn't smirk or flex or toss her hair like some bad soap opera villain. No, she just stood there, poised, elegant, impossibly calm. The kind of calm you only get when you've already won. She looked straight at Celine, then at Marco, and then just loud enough for every camera and ear in that golden garden to hear. She said, "I figured since I paid for it, I'd show up." There it was, the audible gasp. Not polite surprise, not light laughter, a genuine full-body collective reaction. The sound people make when their internal scripts suddenly get rewritten. Marco's fingers slipped off his wine glass. Celine turned pale in a way no blush could hide. Because here's what nobody knew. Not the guests, not the wedding planner, not even the couple themselves. The venue, the vineyard, the chandeliers, the musicians playing soft jazz in the corner. All of it had been quietly funded by a shell company. And that shell company was a portfolio asset of Stellara. Stella had been in the paperwork. She was the reason the wedding had looked like a scene from a royal Netflix series. And no one, not a single soul, had connected the dots until now. Until she pulled off the cleanest, classiest, most cinematic power move in modern memory. The bride's voice finally returned, weak and trailing, like the words were struggling through molasses. You paid for this." Stella turned to her. Her voice didn't rise, didn't falter. She wasn't angry. She was clear. "I paid for the land this venue sits on. The design team, the tech setup, the catering firm. I've acquired 5 of the vendors used here through my portfolio network. So yes, I paid for this wedding indirectly, but intentionally." And then she said the line that would later be quoted on 1,000 TikToks and stitched into every revenge story aesthetic reel for the next 6 months. "You'd be amazed what you can afford when you stop chasing people who don't see your worth." Boom. People weren't just clapping now. They were watching history. Some guests turned to each other, eyebrows raised, whispering Stella's name like it had become a verb. Others, particularly the women, looked like they were watching a version of themselves walk across coals and emerge, not just unburned, but on fire. Because this wasn't just Stella's moment. It was the moment. The moment when every girl who's ever been left on, ghosted after building someone's dreams, passed over for the shinier, glossier version of herself, stood up inside their skin and whispered, "We rise." So here's the real question for you watching this right now. If you could walk into the very place where you were once broken and stand taller, louder, stronger, would you? Drop a diamond emoji if you've ever dreamed of coming back. Not to prove them wrong, but to prove you right? Because that's what Stella just did. And believe it or not, this wasn't even the biggest shock of the night. Stella stood there, not basking in attention, but grounded in it. She wasn't flaunting wealth or power. She was radiating something far more rare. Freedom. The kind of freedom that only comes when you no longer need validation from the very people who once withheld it, when you no longer flinch at being underestimated because you've grown beyond the version of you they thought they knew. But then the final card flipped. A soft murmur spread across the room. One of the guests had Googled something. Probably the older cousin who kept his phone in a leather case and thought he was being discreet. He'd connected the dots. And suddenly, murmurs became whispers. Whispers became gasps, because Stella's company Stellara not only funded the venue, it had recently acquired the luxury hotel chain that Marco's family had spent decades building. Yes, that chain, the one with a velvet-wrapped legacy passed from hand to hand, like a fragile crown. The one he had once bragged to Stella about during Sunday brunch, calling it the family jewel. The one he was supposed to inherit, but couldn't quite manage to keep afloat after a series of bad press scandals and digital missteps. Guess who'd swept in with a silent offer through a firm with no recognizable face, through a paper trail buried under 7 holding companies? Stella. She didn't just walk away with her dignity. She walked away, studied her opponents, learned the game they played, and came back owning the board. Celine's complexion turned the color of an unfinished thought. She tried to whisper something to Marco, but even her voice seemed to betray her. And Marco? He blinked like someone waking up from a dream where he was the hero, only to realize too late he was the plot device in someone else's origin story. And that's when Stella turned not to them, but to the crowd. Her voice didn't tremble. Her tone didn't rise. She wasn't angry. She was clear. "I didn't come here to ruin a wedding. I came because for years I thought I needed to explain myself, to defend my choices, to prove I was worthy of love, success, of being seen." She paused. "Let that hang. But you don't owe explanations to people who only clapped for you when you were quiet." Silence. Then heads nodding. Women in the back squeezing each other's hands under the tables. Someone whispered, "Say that again." Stella took a breath. "I'm not here to reclaim a man. I'm here to reclaim myself. And the version of me that was buried under your expectations, she doesn't exist anymore." Let's stop right here for a second. You. Yes, you. Watching this. Think of someone who once looked at you and only saw what they wanted to see. Who dismissed your dreams, who told you they were being realistic, when all they were being was afraid. What if you could walk back into their world not to hurt, not to punish, but simply to show them you survived. No, you thrived. Drop a strong emoji if you've ever wanted to come back and stand in your truth. Not for applause, but for closure. Because that's what Stella just did. And in doing so, she didn't just shock them. She freed them. And you know what's wild? That room full of people who once whispered about how she wasn't his type, or she'd never make it, or she was just a phase, they didn't just regret what they said. They regretted who they were when they said it, because now they saw her. Really saw her, and every single one of them knew they had judged too soon. But by the time they realized it, she was already gone. They were standing under the same cherry blossom tree where he once got down on one knee with a diamond and a promise, both of which eventually meant nothing. But this time, there were no photographers, no champagne flutes, no curated fairy tale, just the soft rustle of wind through petals and the uncomfortable silence of a man finally seeing the truth through eyes no longer clouded by ego. Marco stood there, no longer the confident CEO who once had the world and Stella in the palm of his hand. His shoulders, once proud and square, had sunk slightly. His jawline, once set in ambition, now trembled with questions he didn't know how to ask. But the biggest shift wasn't in his posture. It was in his eyes. They weren't focused on him anymore. They were fixed on her. You built an empire, he murmured, voice brittle with disbelief. Without me. Stella tilted her head, not in arrogance, but in gentle truth. No, Marco, I built it because of you, or maybe despite you. I'm still figuring that out. He exhaled a small, almost broken sound. You never reached out. She raised an eyebrow. When exactly? When you released a breakup press statement like I was a brand acquisition gone wrong? Or maybe when you got engaged to a woman who looked like she'd stepped out of a magazine and into your mother's approval rating? He looked down. No defense, no spin. Because there was none. You know what hurts? Stella continued, her voice soft but unwavering. It's not that you left. It's that you never saw me. I was in front of you for years, loving you, dreaming beside you, and you looked through me like I was a placeholder until your real life started. He stepped closer, hands open, unsure of what to do with them. But you're everything now. She laughed quietly. No, Marco. I was everything then. You just didn't recognize it. And that was the final truth. The kind that doesn't explode, it sinks in. Like gravity, like silence after a slammed door. Like the moment you realize you had gold in your hands and dropped it because it wasn't shiny enough at the time. I made mistakes, he said, voice cracking. I let fear guide me. Expectations, my parents, my image. But Stella, I never stopped thinking about you. She looked at him, really looked at him, and for a moment he thought, maybe. Maybe there was a crack in the armor, a pause, a chance. But Stella had changed, and this version of her didn't live in maybe anymore. I stopped thinking about you years ago, she said kindly. Not out of anger, out of survival. And you know what? That was the best thing that ever happened to me. The wind picked up again, tossing loose petals around their feet like confetti that had missed its cue. Marco stood there watching her walk away, not with drama or vengeance, but with grace. Like someone who had already forgiven him. Not for his sake, but for hers. She didn't look back. Because the past was no longer her home. And that, dear friends, is what real power looks like. Not revenge, not applause, but the quiet, undeniable peace of a woman who reclaimed her narrative and doesn't need anyone's permission to keep writing it. Now let me ask you something. Have you ever been dismissed, overlooked, replaced? And have you ever dreamed not of revenge, but of healing so completely they wouldn't even recognize who you became? If that hits home, drop something in the comments. Anything. Because Stella's story isn't just fiction. It's the blueprint. And the best part, She was just getting started, and when she said it, when Stella let that truth leave her lips, it didn't echo like a declaration of victory. It landed more like a quiet exhale, the kind of breath you take when you finally set down the weight you've been carrying for years. The kind that lets your shoulders drop, your spine straighten, and your heart beat without armor for the first time in forever. She wasn't angry anymore. That's the part that surprised even her, because for a long time she imagined this moment would be about proving something, showing up in front of everyone who had doubted her, making them feel what she had felt. But standing there bathed in golden afternoon light under those same cherry blossoms from her past, she felt something so much deeper than revenge. She felt peace. Not the kind of peace that comes from being told you're enough, but the kind that comes from no longer needing to be told. Because Stella was no longer that woman begging to be chosen. She was the woman who had chosen herself. The one who didn't just survive the fall, but studied the wind, built her wings, and learned to fly because of it. She left the wedding not in triumph, not in smugness, but in stillness. The kind of stillness that doesn't apologize for walking away from a fire you once thought was warmth. Her heels clicked against the marble path as guests parted silently like the Red Sea. Each of them now unable to look away, but also unsure how to meet her eyes. And Marco, he never said another word. He didn't need to, because every second she walked away was its own kind of answer. The girl he once dismissed as not enough had become the woman whose shadow now stretched longer than his entire legacy. But Stella wasn't walking toward a spotlight. She was walking home to herself. Later that night, when the last candle at the wedding had been extinguished and the champagne had lost its fizz, Stella sat barefoot in her new apartment overlooking the city skyline. No cameras, no audience, just her and the stars, and a quiet glass of wine that she had poured for no one but herself. She scrolled through a few messages. Some from guests she barely remembered, congratulating her, applauding her speech. Some from strangers who'd caught wind of her quiet empire, and were now quoting her words like gospel. You'd be amazed what you can afford when you stop chasing people who don't see your worth. But the message that stayed with her wasn't in her inbox. It was in the mirror. Because for the first time in years, Stella could look herself in the eye and feel nothing but pride. Not because she had money or power or status now, but because she had clarity. She finally understood she was never too much. She just loved the wrong person with the right heart, the right. She gave before she had learned to hold space for herself. She believed in someone who hadn't yet earned her belief. And that's not weakness. That's growth. You see, sometimes the most powerful revenge isn't wealth or status or success. It's peace. It's walking into a room full of people who once doubted you and not needing a single one of them anymore. It's smiling when they ask how you're doing because you really are okay. It's no longer wanting to go back. Not even for a second. Now tell me, have you ever outgrown a version of yourself that once begged for less? Have you ever come full circle and realized the door that once closed on you was actually a blessing? Because Stella's story isn't just a story. It's a reminder that becoming her doesn't happen overnight. It happens when you stop looking for someone else to hand you your worth, and finally remember you were whole all along. Because the truth is, most of us won't walk into a wedding we paid for, dressed in designer silence and poetic justice. We won't own the building where someone once tried to bury us. We might not get the cinematic moment where every head turns and every whisper hushes as we walk in. But we will have our moment. It might come when you get that job you thought you'd never qualify for. When you finally open the door to your own apartment after crashing on couches and pretending you were fine. When you sit across from someone who once said you weren't ready and you no longer feel the need to prove them wrong because you already proved yourself right. That's your Stella moment. And you know what makes it powerful? It's not loud. It's not dramatic. It's not about revenge served cold with a side of poetic irony. It's quiet, intentional, freeing. It's the peace that settles in your chest when you realize you've become the person you once hoped someone else would validate. It's when you no longer chase apologies. When you stop waiting for someone to recognize your worth. When you start looking in the mirror and saying, I see you, I'm proud of you, I've got you. That's what Stella found. That's what so many of us are still fighting for. And if you're in the thick of it, if you're still building from brokenness, still healing from the heartbreak, still rising from the rubble of someone's careless goodbye, I want you to hear this. You don't need to rush the becoming. You don't have to perform strength. You don't need to broadcast your glow up. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is keep going in silence and let your growth be the loudest thing in the room when it's time. Because one day, you'll walk into the version of your life you once begged for. And it won't feel like a comeback. It'll feel like coming home. And when that day comes, you won't need closure. You are the closure. Now let me ask you something sincerely. What's the moment you're working toward? What's the version of you you're building quietly, patiently, painfully? Drop in the comments and tell us your Stella moment, whether it already happened or is still loading, because your story matters. And someone out there is waiting for the day you tell it, just like this. And maybe, just maybe, your comeback isn't for them to see, it's for you to feel. And when you do, it'll be enough. More than enough, because so are you. Because at the end of the day, that's what this channel is about. Not just drama, not just shocking twists or poetic justice, but transformation. The quiet kind, the painful kind, the kind that doesn't always come with applause, but changes everything anyway. If this story stirred something in you, if it reminded you of your worth, your strength, your power to rise even when no one's watching, then you're exactly where you need to be. Here, we don't just tell stories. We honor survival. We celebrate the unseen battles. We spotlight the messy, beautiful, soul-cracking moments that turn ordinary people into legends of their own lives. So if you're ready for more resilience, more redemption, more stories that hold a mirror to who you could be, then don't just scroll past. Hit subscribe because we're just getting started. And when the world forgets the surface, the job title, the heartbreak, the rejection, what they'll always remember is how you rose. Because here at Evergreen Soul Stories, we don't tell stories to entertain. We tell them to awaken. To the one watching in silence, healing in secret, and building in the shadows, we see you. And when your moment comes, make it unforgettable. With that, see you in the next one.
Have you ever felt invisible, like your sacrifices went unnoticed and your dreams were pushed aside for someone else's? Imagine being married to a man for a decade, helping him build an empire from nothing, only to be discarded for a younger, shinier model. He thinks he's won. He's hosting a lavish charity gala, his gorgeous fiancée on his arm, the king of his castle. He pities you, the quiet ex-wife he left behind. But tonight, the doors of that ballroom are about to swing open. And the woman who walks in won't just turn heads, she'll shatter his entire world. The invitation was an act of cruelty disguised as courtesy. It lay on Amelia Vance's simple, reclaimed wood coffee table, a stark rectangle of ivory cardstock in a minimalist apartment that was the antithesis of her former life. The embossed gold lettering seemed to mock the quiet simplicity she had painstakingly built over the last 2 years. The Thorne Foundation Annual Charity Gala. Marcus Thorne. Her, Marcus. No, not anymore. For 12 years, she had been Amelia Thorne, the silent partner in the meteoric rise of Thorne Capital. She wasn't just the woman behind the man, she was the architect of his internal world. She was the one who calmed his volcanic temper after a bad trade, who edited his speeches until they sang with a confidence he didn't naturally possess, who remembered the names of his investors' children and their allergies. She had managed their sprawling Greenwich estate, hosted flawless dinners, and curated a life so seamless that he never had to think about anything but his own ambition. She had been the scaffolding, and once the building was complete, he had kicked her away. The divorce had been brutally efficient. His lawyers, a pack of sleek sharks in $1,000 suits, had painted her as a simple homemaker, entitled and grasping. They'd argued that her contribution was emotional, not financial, and therefore held little value. Drowning in grief and the shock of his betrayal, Amelia hadn't fought. She took the settlement, a sum that felt insulting compared to the billions he controlled, and vanished. She'd wanted to disappear, to erase the woman who had poured her entire being into a man who saw her as a depreciating asset. She retreated to a small, sun-drenched apartment in Brooklyn, swapping manicured lawns for a fire-escape garden of herbs. She sold the designer clothes that felt like costumes from another woman's life and rediscovered her own uniform, soft jeans, cashmere sweaters, and comfortable silence. And in that silence, an old dream, long dormant, began to stir. Before Marcus, Amelia had been a prodigy. A dual major in materials science and computer engineering at MIT, she'd been fascinated by the intersection of technology and art. She had a theory, a wild idea about weaving conductive nanofibers into fabric, creating textiles that could react to biometrics, change color with a thought, or even generate their own subtle light. Marcus had called it a cute hobby before his own career took flight, and like so many of her own passions, she had dutifully packed it away. But now, with nothing but time and a burning need to build something that was hers alone, she unpacked it. She rented a small lab space in the Navy Yard, pouring her settlement into equipment and research. She called her fledgling company AuraForge, a name that spoke of creating something tangible from an unseen energy. For 2 years she worked with monastic devotion. Her team was small, brilliant, and fiercely loyal. They weren't creating fashion. They were creating a new form of expression. The dress, the one she now called the chrysalis gown, was the culmination of that work. It wasn't just a garment, it was a statement, a living piece of art. Woven from a silk polymer blend threaded with micro-LEDs and biometric sensors, it was designed to shimmer with a soft internal luminescence that subtly shifted with the wearer's heart rate and body temperature. It was a masterpiece of technology and design, a secret she had guarded jealously. The invitation to the gala had arrived a week ago. Her first instinct was to burn it. Why would Marcus invite her? Was it a power play? A chance to parade his new fiancée, Isabella Rossi, a 25-year-old model with porcelain skin and the kind of vacant beauty that looked stunning on Instagram? Was it pity? Did he imagine her showing up in a sensible, off-the-rack dress, a ghost from his past, to make his present look even brighter? Her business partner, a pragmatic, no-nonsense engineer named Ben, had seen it differently. Don't you see, Amelia? This isn't a slight. It's an opportunity. The theme is the future of philanthropy. The guest list is every venture capitalist, tech billionaire, and art patron on the East Coast. They're your target audience. This isn't his stage. You can make it yours. The thought had been terrifying, then electrifying. For 2 years, she had been rebuilding herself in the shadows. She had shed the skin of Mrs. Thorne, but she hadn't yet shown the world what, and who, Amelia Vance was. Marcus saw her as a relic of his past. He had no idea she was the architect of her own future. She picked up the invitation, the sharp edges pressing into her fingertips. He thought he was closing a chapter, showcasing his victory. He didn't realize he was giving her the perfect stage for her own debut. She wouldn't go there as Amelia Thorne, the discarded wife. She would go as Amelia Vance, the founder of AuraForge, and she would wear her creation. The chrysalis gown wasn't just a dress, It was her armor, her declaration, and her revenge, all woven into a single, luminous thread. She RSVP'd yes. The view from Marcus Thorne's penthouse on Billionaires' Row was, by any measure, perfect. It stretched from the verdant expanse of Central Park to the glittering spires of Midtown, a kingdom of glass and steel laid at his feet. It was a conqueror's view, and Marcus saw himself as a conqueror. He stood before the floor-to-ceiling window, a tumbler of 25-year-old Macallan in his hand, the very picture of success. But a quiet, gnawing dissatisfaction coiled in his gut. Tonight was his coronation. The Thorne Foundation Gala was the jewel in his philanthropic crown, an event that cemented his place not just among the rich, but among the important. It was a carefully constructed piece of theatre, and he was the lead actor, director, and producer. Every detail, from the Michelin-starred chef to the guest list, had been vetted to project an image of effortless power and benevolent influence. His fiancée, Isabella, emerged from the bedroom, a vision in crimson silk. The dress, a custom Oscar de la Renta, clung to her flawless figure. Diamonds glittered at her throat and ears. She was breathtaking. She was also, he admitted in the privacy of his own mind, a bit of a bore. Their conversations were a loop of gossip, fashion, and plans for their upcoming wedding in Lake Como. She was the perfect accessory, an exquisite piece of art to adorn his life. But sometimes he felt a pang of something he couldn't name when he looked at her. It was a feeling of profound emptiness. "Do you like it, darling?" she asked, striking a pose. "I thought red would be powerful." "You look magnificent," he said, the words automatic. He crossed the room and kissed her, his lips brushing her perfectly painted ones. Her scent was expensive and floral, but it didn't stir him. It was a perfume, not a presence. He thought, unbidden, of Amelia's scent, a faint mix of old books, chamomile tea, and something uniquely her. It was a scent of comfort, of home. He pushed the thought away. Home was now this sterile, art-filled apartment, 80 floors above the city. He had justified the divorce as a necessary evolution. He had outgrown Amelia. She was quiet, intellectual, content with a simple life. She didn't understand the hunger that drove him. In the early days, her calm had been his anchor. But as his star rose, her steadiness began to feel like a boat anchor, holding him back. He wanted a woman who shone beside him, who amplified his own brilliance. Isabella did that. Her beauty turned heads. Her presence on his arm was a statement. "Look what I can have." Inviting Amelia to the gala had been Isabella's idea, a suggestion made with a flick of manufactured magnanimity. "It will show everyone how amicable everything is," she'd said. "It's very modern, very gracious." Marcus had seen the hidden barb in the suggestion. It wasn't about grace, it was about victory. It was a chance for Isabella to mark her territory, to stand beside him while his mousy ex-wife looked on from the sidelines. He'd agreed, driven by a flicker of his own cruelty. He wanted Amelia to see it all, the success, the new love, the life he had built after shedding her. He pictured her in a corner, looking slightly lost, and felt a vindictive sort of pity. Poor Amelia, she just couldn't keep up. "Is everything ready?" Isabella asked, adjusting a diamond earring. "Everything is perfect," he assured her. "Tonight we raise $5 million for the children's literacy program, and we announce the new wing of the museum." His museum, his legacy. But the dissatisfaction remained. He had everything he'd ever wanted. The money, the power, the beautiful woman, yet he felt a fraudulence that haunted his quiet moments. He was playing the part of Marcus Thorne, the great man. Amelia had been the only person who had seen the insecure, ambitious boy he'd once been. She had known him. Isabella knew his credit card limit and his preferred brand of scotch. The difference was vast and terrifying. He drained his glass. "The car is waiting. Let's not be late for our own party." As they descended in the private elevator, he glanced at their reflection in the polished bronze doors. They were a perfect couple, a portrait of modern success. But as he looked closer, he saw the faint lines of stress around his eyes, the slight tension in his jaw. He saw a man in a gilded cage of his own making, and for a fleeting, terrifying moment, he wished he could go back. Back to the small apartment they'd shared, filled with second-hand furniture and Amelia's laughter, where his only ambition had been to make her happy. But that man was gone. He had traded him for this one, the king of a cold and lonely kingdom. The final hours before the gala were a quiet storm of preparation in Amelia's apartment. Ben had arrived with the gown, carrying it in a climate-controlled biometric-locked case that looked like something out of a spy movie. There was no glam squad, no chattering stylists. There was only Ben, Amelia, and the dress. "All systems are nominal," Ben said, his voice betraying a rare tremor of excitement as he unlocked the case. "Biometric sensors are calibrated to your resting heart rate. The core processor is fully charged. Amelia, it's ready." He lifted it from its cradle. The fabric, in its inert state, was a deep, matte charcoal, almost like liquid smoke. It didn't sparkle. It absorbed the light, holding its power in reserve. The cut was deceptively simple. A high neckline, long sleeves, a column silhouette that flowed to the floor. It was elegant, monastic, and utterly severe. It was a canvas. "It looks quiet," Amelia whispered, running a hand over the cool, smooth fabric. "That's the point," Ben said. "The magic isn't in the design, it's in you." Amelia took a deep, steadying breath and began her transformation. She showered, letting the hot water wash away the last of her hesitation. She sat at her small vanity, a piece she'd bought at a flea market, and refinished herself. Her makeup was minimal, a flawless base, a sweep of dark eyeliner to define her intelligent grey eyes, and a soft, nude lip. She didn't want a mask. She wanted her own face, just amplified. Her hair, which she'd worn in a simple, practical bun for 2 years, was her one concession to drama. A stylist, Ben knew, a quiet artist who worked with Broadway actors, had spent the afternoon weaving it into a complex, elegant chignon at the nape of her neck, leaving a few soft tendrils to frame her face. It was sophisticated and severe, the style of a woman who was in complete control. Finally, it was time for the gown. It slipped over her skin like cool water. Ben helped her fasten the nearly invisible clasps at the back. For a moment, she just stood there, letting the weight of it settle on her shoulders. It felt like armor. "Okay," Ben said, tapping a command into a tablet linked to the gown. "Let's boot it up. Just breathe normally, Amelia. Let it sink with you." She closed her eyes and took a slow, deep breath. She felt a subtle vibration against her skin, a barely there hum. When she opened her eyes again, the room was filled with a soft, ethereal glow. The dress was alive. The matte charcoal had transformed into a swirling, incandescent nebula of deep blues and purples, shot through with veins of silver. A soft, pearlescent light pulsed from within the fabric, a slow, steady rhythm that matched her own heartbeat. She lifted a hand, and as her body temperature shifted the air around her arm, the colors swirled, a cascade of shimmering sapphire. It was breathtaking. "My God!" she breathed, looking at her reflection in the full-length mirror. She was unrecognizable. The woman in the mirror was not the quiet, supportive wife. She was not the grieving divorcee. This woman was powerful, ethereal. She looked like she was carved from starlight and shadow. The dress didn't wear her. It was an extension of her, a visible manifestation of the fire and brilliance she had kept hidden for so long. "The market value of the integrated tech and the R&D alone is north of $3 million, Ben said, his voice thick with pride. "But the value of this moment, Amelia? Priceless." She thought of Marcus and Isabella. She pictured Isabella's perfect, predictable beauty. She imagined the polite, dismissive glance Marcus would give her. They were expecting a ghost. They were not prepared for a supernova. A wave of pure, cold adrenaline washed through her. The fear was gone, replaced by a crystalline sense of purpose. This wasn't just about showing up. It was about rewriting the narrative they had so carefully crafted for her. They had cast her as a footnote in his story. Tonight, she would become the headline. "There's no jewelry," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "The dress is the only statement I need to make." Ben nodded, understanding completely. "The car is here. It's time." As she walked to the door, the gown flowed around her, a silent, shimmering galaxy. The light it cast was soft, but it filled the small apartment, banishing all the shadows. Amelia Vance was no longer hiding. She was ready to step into the light, her own light. And she was going to burn so brightly she would be impossible to ignore. The ballroom at the Metropolitan Museum of Art was a symphony of curated opulence. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm, golden light over a sea of black-tie guests. The air hummed with the murmur of polite conversation, the clinking of champagne flutes, and the gentle strains of a string quartet. At the center of it all, holding court near the grand staircase, was Marcus Thorne. He was in his element. Isabella, radiant in her crimson gown, was fused to his side, her laughter bright and practiced. He accepted compliments on the event, shook hands with titans of industry, and moved through the crowd with the easy grace of a man who owned the world. He felt a deep sense of satisfaction. Everything was exactly as he had planned. He had scanned the entrance a few times, a part of him looking for Amelia, morbidly curious to see the pathetic figure she would cut. He imagined her arriving early, lingering awkwardly by the bar. But she was nowhere to be seen. He dismissed the thought. She probably lost her nerve. It was just as the museum director was taking the stage to offer a welcome that a sudden, collective hush fell over the entrance hall. The murmur of conversation didn't just quiet. It ceased, replaced by a wave of stillness that radiated through the room. Heads turned one by one like dominoes falling in slow motion. A collective gasp, soft and incredulous, was the only sound. Marcus turned, an annoyed frown on his face at the interruption. And then he saw her. For a moment, his brain couldn't process the image. Framed in the grand archway was a woman who seemed to be wearing the night sky. She was bathed in a soft internal luminescence, a halo of deep blues and purples that pulsed with a gentle, hypnotic rhythm. The light shifted and swirled as she moved, a living, breathing constellation. She walked into the room, not with arrogance, but with a serene, otherworldly grace that commanded absolute attention. Every eye was on her, every conversation had died. The quartet's music faltered and then stopped entirely. It was as if a celestial body had entered the room, its gravitational pull warping the very fabric of the event. As she drew closer, recognition dawned on Marcus's face, followed by a tidal wave of sheer, unadulterated shock. His champagne flute slipped from his numb fingers and shattered on the marble floor, the sound unnaturally loud in the profound silence. It was Amelia. But it was not the Amelia he knew. The quiet, bookish woman who favored muted tones and minimal fuss was gone. This woman was a vision. Her face, framed by that severe, elegant hairstyle, was calm, her gaze level and direct. She wasn't looking at him. She was simply observing the room, her presence so powerful it felt like a judgment. Isabella saw the look on Marcus's face, and her smile froze, cracking at the edges. She followed his gaze, and her perfectly made-up face paled. She saw not just a beautiful woman, but a rival on a level she couldn't comprehend. Her red dress, which had felt so bold and powerful moments before, now seemed garish and loud. Her diamonds felt like cheap glass next to the living light of Amelia's gown. Amelia finally let her eyes settle on Marcus. There was no anger in her expression, no pain. There was only a cool, placid calm that was more unnerving than any tirade could have been. She walked toward them, her gown whispering against the floor. The crowd parted for her as if by instinct. "Marcus," she said, her voice clear and steady. It carried easily in the silent room. Isabella, you both look well. Marcus struggled to find his voice. His mind was racing, trying to reconcile the woman he had discarded with the goddess standing before him. Amelia, what is that you're wearing? He stammered, his usual eloquence deserting him. A small, knowing smile touched Amelia's lips. It's a prototype, she said simply. From my company. The whispers started then, rippling through the crowd. Company, her company, what company? Isabella, attempting to reclaim the narrative, stepped forward, her voice a little too high. It's very unique, Amelia. Very bright. It was meant to be a dismissal, but it landed as a desperate plea for relevance. Before Amelia could respond, a man rushed to her side, his eyes wide with excitement. It was Alistair Finch, a notoriously shrewd Silicon Valley venture capitalist. "Vance, you made it!" he boomed, ignoring Marcus and Isabella completely. "I saw the patent filing for Aura Forge's reactive textiles last month. It's revolutionary. Is this it? Is this the chrysalis material?" Amelia inclined her head. "The very same, Alistair. I'm glad you approve." The name Aura Forge and the word revolutionary spread through the room like wildfire. Phones were coming out. People were furiously typing into search engines. The focus of the gala had irrevocably shifted. It was no longer about Marcus Thorne's philanthropy. It was about the mysterious, luminous woman who had once been his wife. Marcus watched, frozen, as the most powerful people in the room, his guests, converged on Amelia, their faces alight with curiosity and awe. He was suddenly on the outside, looking in at his own party. He had wanted her to see the world he had built. Instead, she had walked in and casually, effortlessly unveiled a new world of her own, a world so far beyond his comprehension that it made his own empire of money and influence feel small, dull, and utterly insignificant. He looked at the shattered glass at his feet, and it felt like a perfect metaphor for his perfectly constructed reality. The car ride back to the penthouse was a study in weaponized silence. The plush leather interior of the Rolls-Royce, usually a cocoon of comfort, felt like a pressurized chamber. Isabella sat rigid on her side, her crimson dress a slash of anger in the dim light. Marcus stared out the window, the glittering Manhattan skyline a blur of mocking lights. The carefully orchestrated triumph of his evening had not just been spoiled. It had been hijacked, dismantled, and handed to the one person he had written off as a failure. Isabella was the first to speak, her voice tight and brittle. "What was that, Marcus?" He didn't turn from the window. "I have no idea." It was a lie. He knew exactly what it was. It was a reckoning. "No idea?" she scoffed, the sound sharp. "Your ex-wife shows up in a light-up dress, and suddenly she's the second coming of Steve Jobs, and you have no idea? Did you know she had a company?" "No, I did not," he clipped out. The admission felt like swallowing glass. How could he not have known? He, Marcus Thorne, whose entire business was built on knowing things before anyone else. He had investigators who could dig up the deepest secrets of his corporate rivals, yet he had been completely blind to the revolution happening under his nose, orchestrated by the woman who had shared his bed for 12 years. It was a failure of intelligence so profound it made him feel physically ill. "Aura Forge," Isabella spat the name as if it were poison. "By the time we left, Chrysalis Gown was trending worldwide. And your gala? It's a footnote. Stunning tech debut at Thorne Foundation Gala. They're not talking about your $5 million for the children. They're talking about her." The jealousy and fury rolling off her were palpable. But underneath it, Marcus could sense her fear. Isabella's currency was beauty and proximity to power. Tonight, Amelia had displayed a different kind of power. The power of creation, of intellect, of genuine innovation. It was a power Isabella couldn't compete with, and she knew it. She had been rendered irrelevant, a pretty but static painting next to a dynamic, interactive masterpiece. "She did it on purpose," Isabella continued, her voice rising. "She waited. She knew this was your night. She did it to humiliate us, to humiliate me. This has nothing to do with you, Marcus snapped, finally turning to look at her. The statement was cruel, but it was true. This was about him and Amelia. It had always been about them. Isabella was just collateral damage. The look on her face, a mixture of shock and wounded pride, gave him a momentary bitter satisfaction. He felt cornered, and like any cornered animal, he was lashing out. When they arrived at the penthouse, the silence returned, heavier and more menacing than before. Isabella swept out of the elevator and went straight to the bar, pouring herself a large glass of vodka. Marcus went to his office, the one place he felt in control. He powered on his terminal, his fingers flying across the keyboard. He searched for AuraForge. The results flooded his screen. It was a privately held R&D company. Small, discreet, but with a list of patents that made his breath catch. Reactive textiles, biometric feedback loops, smart fabric integration. The board of advisors included 2 Nobel laureates and a former head of innovation from Google. This wasn't a hobby. This was a technological titan in the making. He found an article in a niche tech journal from 6 months ago detailing AuraForge's mission. It included a photo of the founder, Amelia Vance. It was a simple headshot, but her eyes held a calm determination he hadn't seen in years. He read her bio, MIT-trained materials scientist and engineer. He had forgotten that part of her. He had actively dismissed it. He remembered her talking about her ideas late at night, her face animated with passion. He had patted her on the head and told her to focus on planning their next dinner party. The memory now burned with a new, excruciating shame. The final crushing blow came when he found a list of early-stage investors. Alistair Finch was one, but another name stood out. David Chen, the CEO of an investment firm that had passed on a major deal with Thorn Capital just last year, citing a lack of visionary leadership. Chen had invested $10 million in AuraForge. Marcus leaned back in his chair, the air leaving his lungs. This wasn't just a personal humiliation, it was a professional one. He had underestimated her on every conceivable level. He had discarded what he thought was a simple stone, only to watch it be polished into a diamond that outshone his entire kingdom. Isabella appeared in the doorway, her face streaked with mascara. "So?" she asked, her voice hollow. "What did you find?" He couldn't look at her. "She's not who we thought she was." "No," Isabella said, her voice dripping with a newfound bitter wisdom. "She's exactly who she always was. You just never bothered to see it." She turned and walked away, leaving him alone with the glowing screens that detailed the scale of his miscalculation. The view from his window, once a symbol of his triumph, now felt like a view from a precipice. And for the first time, Marcus Thorne was afraid of the fall. The following morning, Amelia's apartment was filled not with the scent of champagne and victory, but with the familiar, comforting aroma of coffee and toasted bagels. Sunlight streamed through the large windows, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. The chrysalis gown lay inert in its case, once again a quiet, charcoal thing. The magic was dormant, waiting. Ben sat across from her at her small kitchen table, scrolling through his tablet with a grin that threatened to split his face. "We're a verb, Amelia," he said, not looking up. "To pull an AuraForge, it means to make a spectacular and unexpected comeback. It's all over Twitter." He rattled off the headlines. Forbes, "The woman in the starlight gown, tech's newest unicorn." Wired, "Beyond wearables, AuraForge just made fashion intelligent." Vogue, "The only dress that mattered at the Met." Amelia took a slow sip of her coffee, the warmth of the mug a grounding presence in her hands. She had expected a reaction, but not this. Her inbox was a digital avalanche of emails from venture capitalists, fashion houses, journalists and CEOs. They weren't just interested, they were clamoring. But she didn't feel the triumphant glee she had anticipated. Instead, a profound sense of calm had settled over her. The night hadn't been an act of revenge, she realized. It had been an act of liberation. It was the final, definitive severing of her old identity. Seeing the shock on Marcus's face had not brought her pleasure, only a distant clinical confirmation of a truth she had finally accepted. He had never seen her at all. "Are you okay?" Ben asked, finally looking up and sensing her contemplative mood. "You're awfully quiet for someone who just conquered the world." "I'm better than okay, Ben," she said, a real smile gracing her lips for the first time that morning. "I'm free. I spent so many years measuring my worth by his perception of me. Last night I realized his perception is irrelevant. It's a broken metric." Her phone buzzed, displaying a name that made her heart give a single, hard thump. Marcus Thorne. She let it go to voicemail. A moment later it buzzed again. And again. "He's persistent," Ben noted dryly. "He's panicking," Amelia corrected. "He's not trying to reach me. He's trying to reclaim control of the story, my story." She felt no desire to speak to him. What could he possibly say? An apology? A demand? An offer? None of it mattered. His voice was a language from a country she no longer lived in. Her future was here, in this sunlit room, with her brilliant partner and a world of possibilities unfurling before them. They spent the day fielding the most critical inquiries, Ben acting as a ruthless gatekeeper while Amelia set the strategy. They turned down 3 major morning shows, opting instead for an exclusive interview with a respected female journalist from the Wall Street Journal known for her deep tech reporting. They ignored the clamoring from the fashion world, deciding to position Auraforge first and foremost as a technology company. "The dress was the proof of concept," Amelia explained, pacing her living room, her mind on fire with plans. "It's not about party tricks, Ben. It's about the applications. Medical-grade fabrics that can monitor a patient's vitals in real time. Protective gear for firefighters that can detect external heat and atmospheric toxins. Search and rescue uniforms with integrated light and location beacons. That's the future. That's the legacy." Ben watched her, his expression full of admiration. He had seen her toil in obscurity for 2 years, driven by a quiet, fierce intelligence. Now the world was seeing it too. The woman he saw now was not the one who had first hired him. That woman had still been shadowed by her past, her confidence fragile. This Amelia stood tall, her vision clear, her voice resonating with an authority that was entirely her own. Late in the afternoon, a courier delivered a small, hand-addressed envelope. It wasn't from Marcus. The return address was a law firm she didn't recognize. Inside was a single sheet of paper and a cashier's check for $2 million. The letter was brief. "Ms. Vance, this check represents the full post-tax value of the settlement I received upon my own divorce. I considered it the price of my silence and complicity. I no longer wish to be silent. Your gown was more than just beautiful. It was a revelation. I believe in what you are building. Please accept this as an anonymous seed investment from one woman who is finding her voice to another who has clearly found hers. I wish you all the success you so richly deserve." There was no signature, but Amelia knew. She looked at the check, then out the window at the sprawling, indifferent city. The money was significant, but the gesture was everything. It was a sign that her light had not just exposed a lie, but had also ignited a spark of truth in someone else. She put the check down on the table. The war with Marcus was over because she had simply refused to fight. She wasn't his opposite. She was a different entity entirely, moving in an orbit he couldn't even map. This was her new dawn, and the sun was just beginning to rise. The fallout from the gala was a slow-motion demolition of Marcus Thorne's world. The first cracks appeared in the media. The fawning post-event coverage he'd anticipated was replaced by speculative profiles of Amelia Vance and Auraforge. His name was mentioned only in the context of being her ex-husband. The narrative had been stolen from him, and he had no idea how to get it back. At the office, the atmosphere was thick with a new, unsettling deference. His team still followed his orders, but he could see the questions in their eyes. He heard the whispers when he walked down the hall. He, the man who prided himself on his foresight, had missed the single biggest emerging tech story of the year, one that had been germinating in his own home. It made him look not just blind, but foolish. The professional repercussions began a week later. He was in a board meeting presenting a bold new acquisition strategy when his phone vibrated with a call from David Chen. Marcus prided himself on never taking calls during meetings, but this was different. He excused himself, his heart pounding. "David," he said, forcing a casual tone, "good to hear from you. Having second thoughts about passing on our last round?" Chen's voice was cool and devoid of pleasantries. "No, Marcus. I'm calling to inform you that my firm is divesting from the 2 funds we have with Thorn Capital. The paperwork will be with you this afternoon." The blood drained from Marcus's face. It was a massive blow, not just financially, but to his reputation. "David, wait. We can talk about this. What's the issue? Our returns have been stellar." "My issue, Marcus, is one of judgment," Chen said, his voice cutting. "I invest in leaders who can identify and cultivate visionary talent. It's become clear to me that you were sitting on a gold mine of it for over a decade and failed to recognize it. If you can't see the value right in front of your own eyes, I have no confidence in your ability to see it in the market. I'm moving my capital to people with better vision, people like your ex-wife." The line went dead. Marcus stood in the hallway, the phone clutched in his hand, his knuckles white. The insult was so precise, so devastating, it left him breathless. He returned to the boardroom, his face a granite mask. He couldn't show them the wound. He couldn't let them see him bleed. Things at the penthouse were even worse. Isabella had retreated into a sullen, resentful silence. She spent her days shopping with a vengeance, filling the apartment with expensive things as if to build a fortress against her own irrelevance. Their conversations were stilted and transactional. The easy affection between them had evaporated, replaced by a brittle tension. He now saw her not as a beautiful partner, but as another one of his acquisitions, one whose value was plummeting. He continued to call Amelia, but she never picked up. He left rambling messages, his tone shifting from demanding to pleading to conciliatory. He wanted to understand. He wanted to be part of it. He told himself he was trying to make amends, but the truth was uglier. He saw her success, and like everything else in his life, he wanted to own a piece of it. His desperation peaked 2 weeks after the gala. He drove to her neighborhood in Brooklyn, a place he hadn't set foot in for over a decade. He found her apartment building, a modest pre-war walk-up. It was so small. He sat in his car for an hour, watching her window, feeling like a stalker. What was he even doing here? What would he say if she came out? "I'm sorry I crushed your spirit and discarded you, but now that you're successful, can I have some?" He saw her leave the building with the man he recognized from the gala, Ben. They were talking animatedly, laughing. Amelia's face was open and alive in a way he hadn't seen since the first years of their marriage. She looked happy, truly, deeply happy. And she was happy without him. That was the realization that finally broke through his narcissism. Her new life wasn't about him. Her success wasn't a performance for his benefit. He was not the sun she orbited. He wasn't even a distant star. He was just a black hole she had escaped. He started the car and drove away, the carefully constructed facade of his life crumbling around him. He had spent his entire life accumulating things, money, companies, art, a beautiful fiancée, to prove his worth. But he had willingly given away the one person who had valued him for who he was, not what he had. And in doing so, he had lost the only thing that was ever truly priceless. He was Marcus Thorn, the man who had everything, and he had never felt so bankrupt. The meeting was on Amelia's terms, not in a boardroom or a fancy restaurant, but in a quiet, public conservatory at the Brooklyn Botanic Garden. It was neutral ground, filled with life and light, a world away from the cold glass and steel of Marcus's empire. He arrived first, looking diminished. His usually impeccable suit seemed to hang on him. The confident swagger was gone, replaced by a restless, haunted energy. When Amelia walked in, dressed in simple linen trousers and a soft silk blouse, she looked like she belonged there, at peace among the growing things. "Thank you for meeting me," he said, his voice hoarse. "I'm not here for you, Marcus," she replied, her tone gentle but firm. "I'm here for me. I needed to do this to close the book. So, say what you need to say." They sat on a simple wooden bench, surrounded by the lush green of ferns and the scent of orchids. For a long moment he just looked at her, truly looked at her, perhaps for the first time. He saw the intelligence in her eyes, the quiet strength in her posture. He saw everything he had missed. "I was a fool," he began, the words clumsy, rusty from disuse. "There's no other word for it. I built my life around an image, and I threw away the only real thing in it because it didn't fit the picture." "I wasn't a thing, Marcus," she corrected him quietly. "I was your wife." The word hung in the air between them, heavy with the weight of shared history. "I know," he whispered. "I'm sorry, Amelia, for everything, for not listening, for not seeing you, for the things my lawyers said, for believing that my success was mine alone." He finally looked her in the eye. "I see it now. I see you. And I am so, so sorry." Amelia listened, her expression unreadable. She had imagined this moment 1,000 times in the depths of her grief. She had imagined screaming at him, crying, demanding answers. But now, sitting here, she felt none of that. She only felt a profound sense of peace. His apology wasn't a key that would unlock her happiness. She had already found that key on her own. It was simply an echo from a distant room. "I accept your apology," she said, "not because you deserve forgiveness, but because I deserve to be free of the weight of my anger. I have been for a while, actually, but this is the final step." He looked hopeful for a second. "Does that mean, could we—" She held up a hand, stopping him. "No, Marcus, there is no we. My life is full. I'm building something I love, something that will change the world in ways your money never could. And I'm happy." She stood up. "I need you to understand this. My success isn't your redemption story. It's not a lesson you get to learn from and then feel better about yourself. It's my life. It has nothing to do with you anymore." The finality in her voice was absolute. This wasn't a negotiation. It was a verdict. "What about Isabella?" Amelia asked, a flicker of genuine curiosity in her eyes. Marcus looked down at his hands. "She left last week. She said she didn't want to be a consolation prize." He let out a dry, humorless laugh. "She took the engagement ring. Fair enough. It was the most honest transaction we ever had." Amelia nodded slowly. She felt a sliver of pity for him, a man so utterly alone in the gilded cage he had built. But it was a distant, detached pity. His fate was his own to write now. "Goodbye, Marcus," she said. And with that, she turned and walked away down the sun-dappled path, not looking back. She moved with the light, easy grace of a woman who knew exactly where she was going. Marcus watched her until she disappeared behind a wall of green. He was left alone on the bench, surrounded by the vibrant, indifferent beauty of the garden. He had come here seeking something: absolution, a second chance, a piece of her light to warm his cold world. But he left with nothing but the stark, painful clarity of what he had lost. It wasn't just a wife or a business opportunity. He had lost the best part of himself, and he knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that he would never get it back. His redemption wouldn't come from her. It would have to come from the long, lonely work of learning to live with the ghost of the man he could have been. Amelia's story isn't just about a dress. It's about reclaiming your own narrative. It's a powerful reminder that your worth is never defined by someone else's inability to see it. She didn't seek revenge. She sought redemption, not from her ex-husband, but for herself, by finally embracing the brilliance she had hidden away for so long. She found her power not in tearing him down, but in building her own world, a world so bright it simply cast his in shadow. This story is for anyone who's ever felt underestimated, overlooked, or left behind. It's for the architects, the dreamers, and the builders who are quietly working on their own masterpiece. If Amelia's journey from heartbreak to triumph inspired you, please hit that like button, share this video with someone who needs to hear this message, and be sure to subscribe for more stories of incredible transformation. Let me know in the comments, what did you think of her final choice to walk away?